Hey, what's up? Today I'm gonna dispel two myths that you have heard and maybe you believe. I'm gonna tell you some things that may shatter the way that you view a certain number of topics. So let's get straight into it. The first thing I'm gonna dispel is the idea of higher taxes leading to higher tax revenue. That myth was dispelled by a law now known as Hauser's Law. I may be pronouncing his name incorrectly, and if I am, then let me know in the comments below how to pronounce his last name. But I'm going to link to these two articles that I'm going to show you right now in the description below. If you're watching on Facebook or somewhere else, join my YouTube channel, subscribe, and that way you can see the links. But Hauser is a San Francisco investment economist who basically, it says he published fresh and eye-opening data about the Federal Reserve or federal tax system 15 years ago. Surprised no one else caught on to this, and no one else caught on before he did, actually. But basically what he found is that the tax revenue that we bring in is relatively pretty close to being the same no matter what the top marginal tax rate is. And it ends up being about 17 to 18% on average, ranging from like 14.5% to 19.5% of the country's GDP. So when you measure it by the GDP, it basically stays the same regardless of what the tax rate is. So the reason why this is so important is because a lot of people think that all we need to do is make the rich pay their fair share. What they don't realize is that the rich is already paying far more than their fair share. Keep in mind, 45% of Americans don't even pay income tax. That means if you pay $5 in income taxes, you pay more than the bottom 45% pay, all combined. So 45, that's over 100 million people. If the bottom 100 million people in the United States were to put all their money into a pile of what they pay for income taxes, if you pay $5 for the whole year, you'll pay more than 100 million people put together. So who's not paying their fair share? It's not the 1%. Off the top of my head, I think the top 1% pays about 45% of the income taxes, which means they pay the income taxes for the bottom 45% that don't pay anything. And that means the other roughly 50%, they pay the 50%, the other half of the income taxes. So the 1% pays as much for half of Americans, and the other half, the top 49% pay the other half. I mean, I don't know, maybe a pie graph would illustrate this, but this is crazy. It's propaganda. And why do you think people like Bernie Sanders and other people from the government, especially these democratic socialists that are becoming more and more popular, why do you think they want to tax the 1%? It's like the old quote, the famous quote about the bank robber that was asked, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. Why do these people want to tax the 1%? Because that's where the money is. They're the ones with the money. Why bother trying to tax people who have no money to begin with? And if we all had money, it would be hard for them to convince us to let them take a huge chunk of our money. But all we do is we create this democracy, which is really majority rule by majority. It's the majority ruling over the minority. It's the majority forcing their will upon minorities. So if you want to protect the minorities, you've got to protect the 1% because they are the minority. It's so funny. I'm sorry. I mean, I think it's funny. If you don't, let me know why. Let me know in the comments below. I'm open to hear other people's ideas, you know, as long as they make sense. If you've got a logical argument, let's hear it. Otherwise, if you agree, give me a thumbs up, you guys. My channel's been shadow banned for speaking too much truth, and they don't want my opinion out there. So sharing the video, liking and subscribing, all those things help to get the message out, and it helps to combat the big censorship that's going on social media and these big channels. So I know that I'm starting to ramble here. So let me go. So the first myth I'm dispelling is that higher taxes lead to higher revenues. The second myth I'm dispelling is the myth of the 90% income tax. And this is another thing that's pointed at as a historical basis for a high tax today. And people like Bernie Sanders, you know, really he's the one that made this really popular. And what he's bringing to everyone's attention is that, oh, you know, at one point we had income tax 90%. It actually hit 92%. So I'm going to explain why that is. I mean, it's true, but it's misleading at the same time. I've got this article. I'm going to link to both these articles below. But it explains it really simply, really short article. But I'm basically going to tell you the reason why that is misleading and really doesn't mean much is because people didn't pay it. All right. So yes, we had a 90% tax rate on paper, but in action, in reality, in real life, people weren't paying 90% tax. Why? Well, you know, people, if they know about a booby trap, they go around it. Okay? No one's gonna let somebody take 90+% of what they earn. They probably won't even earn it. If they can't bypass this tax or theft, you know, they probably won't earn it. Think about it. Especially if there's a welfare state. You know, if you could go out and if you're going to go out and work, why would you work if the government's going to take 90% of what you make? You just sit at home, especially if the government's going to take care of you if you don't work. You know, especially for low-income workers. I mean, if you're making millions and millions and millions of dollars, if you're making $100 million a year, yeah, they take 90%. You still get $10 million a year. You may still work for the $10 million. But if you're on the low or even middle class side of the spectrum, why would you work why would you work to only keep 10% of what you make when you can basically have the same living standard, sometimes even higher living standard, by doing nothing and let the government take care of you? So, you know, you've got to realize that people respond to incentives, and we need to incentivize people to do the actions that we want them to do. We want people to work because working is being productive to society. It should be. I mean, not always. If one person is digging a hole and the other person is filling it, then it's pointless. But generally, people, when they work, they're providing value. If they're not providing value, then why would the consumer be, you know, buying that product or service? You know, the only time it isn't, the only time people are working and it's not providing value is when, someone has to be buying it. But if it's being done involuntarily, like we're being forced to buy it, like the government forces us to pay for war, well, the reason why we actually pay for that is because we're forced. We can't opt out of it. I wish we could send in a check for whatever we think we want to, you know, contribute, like a church, and then determine how we want the money allocated. But anyways, you know, if it's done voluntarily, we have to assume that the people are involved in the transaction are benefiting from it. So it's increasing their living standard. So That's what we want. We want people out there working and increasing other people's living standard. We want them building value for society. Because when they're not working and they're sucking off of the productivity of those that are working, then they're a leech on society. So we want to discourage them from doing that and encourage people to be productive for society. Well, the income tax, especially a progressive income tax, especially up to 90%, and Bernie Sanders is on record saying he doesn't think that's too high. So what is too high then? Somewhere between 90% and 100. I mean, maybe he doesn't think 100% is too high. He didn't. So, like, a lot of people think that all we need to do is tax the rich more, and that will make the poor live better. Well, I've already shown you that's not true, because that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get more taxes. But also, it can actually hurt the poor, and particularly the poor working class, low-skilled workers, basically. It's going to hurt them the most, and here's why. Because the rich people are just going to move their businesses elsewhere. They're going to move to a country that isn't going to take 90% of their profits. Also, what they're going to do is these businesses, because no one wants to let someone take their money from them if they can get around it. Businesses, what they do is they spend money on attorneys and accountants to circumvent the tax code. So that's why when we had a 90% tax rate, no one was paying it, because there were loopholes and stuff like that to get out of it. So what that does is it diverts a company's resources from where they could maybe lower prices on their products or services. They could pay their employees more, both of which increases the standard of living for their employees, for their customers. But instead, what it's doing is it's diverting those resources, the money, and they're spending it on accountants instead. They're spending it on attorneys, so that way they don't have to pay the tax. So, do you want the money to go to lower prices for the consumer, or bigger paychecks for the employees, or do you want the company to spend the money on attorneys and accountants to bypass this complex legal tax code of like over 75,000 pages of tax code? Also, if a company takes its business across seas, like manufacturing or whatever, because we have high minimum wage, we have high taxes or whatever, then the workers obviously are without a job. If they're low-skilled workers, you've got the same amount of low-skilled workers, but you've got less jobs for low-skilled workers. So then what do? They get on some sort of welfare because they no longer have a job. So now, instead of being productive for society, they are a leech on society. Let me give you a quote of what this Hauser guy who came up with the Hauser's law. Actually, let me show you. So this graph right here. Let me make this bigger. I haven't even looked at this yet. This graph shows you when we had a 90% tax rate, here's the tax revenue. The tax rate went down, and the tax revenue remained basically the same. Yeah, there's a little bit of, whatever, but that's expected. Look at this, 90% tax rate, 20, 30, 40% tax revenue is the same. So, this chart right here says it all. Let me give you a quote. Says, raising taxes encourages taxpayers to shift, hide, and underreport income. Higher taxes reduce the incentives to work, produce, invest, and save, thereby dampening overall economic activity and job creation. So, these two articles are really, really short. So, if this doesn't make sense to you or whatever, just go ahead and read it. But I kind of wanted to explain that. I hope that sheds a lot of light on the situation because it's important. The government wants to take our money, but they need people to go along with it. And as long as they can keep a large percentage of the population poor, keep them down, then it's easy to convince. If 45% of the people aren't paying taxes, they have a conflict of interest. That's why, some people suggest, and maybe it's a good idea, if you aren't paying taxes, you shouldn't be allowed to vote. Because voting, helps determine what we do with our taxes. Well, why should you have a voice when you're not the one who's putting in on this? It's like if we're all ordering pizza and, there's 2 of us ordering pizza and there's 10 of us in the room. Well, the 2 people that are paying for the pizza should be allowed to decide what's on the pizza. Now, if you want to make some decisions on what goes on the pizza, then you need to chip in on the pizza, right? So anyway, the government wants people to be poor because then they can always go to the poor people and say, hey, you want us to take money from them? Look at all the money they've got. We'll take some money from them and we'll give you a little bit. They've got to give the poor a little bit so that way, the poor go along with it. Otherwise, it would be considered theft. If we all had money and all they did was take and they didn't redistribute a little bit, we would all be like, no, you can't take that. We'll figure out how to build the roads and defend ourselves and stuff like that without giving you the right to take away whatever you want from us. But as long as you've got 45% of the people that isn't paying taxes, and then it's an easy sell to say, hey, look, you want us to go take from this minority group, this small group of people who happen to have all the money? We're going to take that. We're going to take a little bit for ourselves because we've got bills. We got to pay our bills. We're not working for free. This ain't volunteer work. We're getting paid. It's a government job. And we're going to help you. And, and to people who don't know any better, this makes sense. This seems like the fair thing to do. Actually, they think it's like the moral thing to do, to take money from people who earned it and give it to people that didn't earn it. And they think it's greedy for these people not wanting to pay taxes. How is it greedy to want to keep the money that you've earned, but it's not greedy to want to take the money that they've earned? All right? This is a big topic. I don't want to go too much into it. But if you have any questions or whatever, leave me a comment below, and I hope to see you in the next video.